I'm joined by Niall Oulton, who has joined PyMC Labs recently, bringing in a lot of marketing analytics experience. He has worked over a decade doing marketing analytics, media mix models, and at places like game theory. So thanks for joining us. I'm curious how, from that background in marketing analytics, you then discovered Bayesian modeling and why you thought that that was especially appealing for solving those types of problems.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. So, I mean, marketing mix modeling isn't new. It's been around since the 1980s, and predominantly given the complexity of computer software and computing power, used a frequentist framework. So very basic linear regression, and that was pretty consistent, pretty much until recently, in the last few years. And then with the availability of open source software, so PyMC and then amongst others, companies started to experiment in Bayesian methods and applying it to marketing analytics. And I think one of the primary reasons of why it seems sensible to move to that is fundamentally Bayesian methods forces you to think about the data generating process. So historically, when you build an MMM in a frequentist framework, it's very easy to sort of like chop and change, try different variables and keep going until you find something which kind of works. And you can kind of iterate through many different versions of a model until you get something which inherently makes sense. And fundamentally, it's not really an efficient way to work. You're kind of like randomly trying things until you get something which sticks. With a Bayesian framework, you look at your data set, you think about how everything pieces together. And it's not just simple, just coefficients. You can have a lot of different functions that we have. Obviously, add stop functions can be estimated within it. Start thinking at what the type of data is. Are you working with count data? Is it normally distributed? Is it highly dispersed? You've got a variety of different assumptions that you can build into your model inherently from the start. So, there's a lot more thought process that goes into the framework, and then in building the model is, I think, a lot more satisfying with that. And then I think the other thing, which is probably not really spoken about, is especially marketing analytics, is the uncertainty. So, the frequentist framework, you get the coefficient, you'll get confidence bounds, and I think confidence bounds again are kind of misunderstood. They're sort of randomly your coefficient randomly is somewhere in between those two bounds. With the Bayesian posterior, you have a full understanding of the exact probability at each point, and you can then take that probability and make decisions off that. And I think that's something where we're starting to see, optimizers take into account this uncertainty rather than just the general sort of response curve.
Yeah, and I think actually the 2 points you made can be combined. So one with the, I guess, more traditional approach, right? That's a lot of pre-processing steps, and then at the end maybe you fit a linear regression to that. But with the Bayesian model, the whole pipeline sort of fits together in one coherent model, right? So then when you're thinking about uncertainty, that uncertainty flows like from the very early inputs all the way through to the outputs.
Yeah.
But if you have that like sort of stepwise approach where like just this transform after transform after transform, how could you possibly like have the uncertainty flow through? Like you have maybe p-values at the end of that linear regression, but it doesn't sort of incorporate the whole pre-processing pipeline. And then where do you see the marketing analytics space in general in terms of like Bayesian modeling? Is that like widely established now, or do you think there's still some catching up to do?
I think it's most agencies are moving that way. You're starting to see blog posts by companies about Bayesian MMMs and generally push them into a positive light. So it gives an indication of what they're using. And generally, a lot of agencies don't like to exclusively say what they're using. But you can kind of see it's moving that way. There is definitely some resistance. You can tell on LinkedIn there'll be a post of why Bayesian MM isn't quite the silver bullet to everything. And I think a lot of agencies are doing that because they're probably invested a lot in their own in-house software or their own methods, and to make a transition from how you do things or how you've historically done things to something in a Bayesian framework can be quite a big momentous shift. And to make that shift takes a lot of investment, time, and risk. So, if you're a company and you've been around 10, 20 years doing it one way, to make that change can be quite scary. So there is definitely hesitancy by some companies, and I think eventually they will have to move that way because it's more efficient. You get a lot more insights, and it's better for clients. It's better for the agency itself, and generally for employees actually doing the models. It's a lot more fun and sensible way to modeling. So, from anyone from down to an analyst gets a lot more enjoyment about what they're building rather than, throwing hundreds of variables at a model and seeing what sticks. It's just makes sense all around.
Yeah. And then for these agencies, I would imagine there's a lot of upskilling that needs to happen in terms of like just learning Bayesian modeling.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. I think when I first started looking into it, the resources were pretty thin. There wasn't much. Like I used a book by Ben Lambert, which I would definitely recommend. I think it's called A Student's Guide to Bayesian Statistics. And it's got that perfect balance between like enough math and enough intuition to kind of bring it all together. And with that, he has YouTube videos for each one. So it's kind of like, for me, it was like a perfect resource that was separate to marketing analytics, but enough so like, it's not as intimidating as reading a 50-page paper on Bayesian stats, which to the average reader is could be quite scary, and you wouldn't really get anything from it. And there were some other resources. I think there was like a HelloFresh blog that were using PyMC, but now you're seeing, if you go over Medium or Google or anything, you're seeing loads of blog posts about the conceptually how it works, but then also actual tutorials of actually how to do it. And then on top of that, you've then now got open source software, which are packages like PyMC Marketing, which actually pretty much do the hard work for you. It's like a plug and play. There's no need to sort of build your model in from the ground up in PyMC that you used to have to do. And I think that's going to make it a lot more accessible to people.
So, and I guess there you're touching on this other trend that's underway in marketing analytics, where it was towards Bayesian methods. And of course, then the other one kicked off by Meta with Robin is open source, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that was really had a huge impact. So, and then of course there's Google Lightweight MMM, and now we came out with PyMC Marketing jointly. What do you think? Where do you see that trend going, and what type of impact do you feel it had on the industry? Because also I feel like that is even a more maybe impactful thing, because you can just change the way your product operates, right? Mm-hmm. But like open source is an inherently different business model. Mm-hmm. That seems like it might be a little bit more fundamental as a challenge to these established marketing analytics companies.
Yeah, I mean, historically, before open source, you'd have to spend hundreds of thousands to millions to build your own in-house software. And that would be combined the back end and also sort of any sort of user interface or however your workflow works. With open source, it's there, it's ready, and it's always improving. So, we have loads of contributors working on it, on new features, and it's kind of like updating as we go. It's obviously not quite as fast as if you had a seed funding of 10 million pounds and that, but it's just a continuous movement. I think one really interesting trend with open source that I've seen recently is some SaaS companies actually using the open source software as an engine in the back end. So, with Robin or PyMC Marketing, you still have to have some sort of R or Python-based experience. It's not detailed Python experience, so they're pretty simple functions, but someone still has to know it to some extent to get something out of it. But what we're starting to see now is SaaS companies openly, they're not secretly using open source. Some probably are, but some companies are there where you can just go, yeah, I want that engine, and then you've got all the UI there built for you, and obviously you just pay that company a subscription fee. And I think that's a really interesting trend, because it's going to make these open source software engines accessible to anyone. Doesn't matter who you are. You can, as long as you can load a file and then click a few buttons, you've got all the insights you want.
Yeah, and as the people releasing PyMC marketing, I'm totally excited to see anyone using this in a paid for product or whatever.
Yeah.
Like as long as people are using it, it's great. Because ultimately, like those things do flow back to improvements in the library and just like make the whole ecosystem better.
Yeah.
So obviously, PyMC marketing is built on PyMC. Why did you gravitate to that package in your work?
In terms of what compared to say
Stan or NumPyro, like
okay. I think one of the key things is like the amount of tutorials, and I think that's the key thing to adoption is if there's more resource out there, it's easier to follow. And I think personally, I found the model builder interface quite intuitive, quite nice. You know, you load in your data, you set your priors, you've got your likelihood function, pm.sample, jobs are done.
Yeah.
And then you've got your inference data, and then now even with the integration with RViz, makes things a lot more simpler. So I just found it intuitive, easy to use, and it just made sense.
Certainly, when I started PyMC Labs, I was really surprised that marketing analytics was like so eager and advanced in its adoption of Bayesian methodologies, because the perspective that we have, right, is that we see into all these different industries and see how far on their trajectory they are. And marketing analytics, I think, is probably among the furthest. And yeah, do you think that that is inherent to, well, that marketing analytics is like just very eager to adopt new technologies?
I think from a personal perspective, I am. So, one of the things I always do and have done is look at anything new that can be applied to the industry, whether that's Bayesian based or within a, could be sort of hidden Markov models. It could be extreme value analysis. How can those sort of concepts be applied to marketing analytics, and how can we create more innovative and detailed solutions for our clients to solve problems or business questions they have? So, personally, from a curiosity standpoint, that's how I sort of branch into these things and see, when you see something that works, you're like, brilliant, cool, this makes sense. And I imagine there's a lot of other people in the industry doing the same. And when you have a lot of people like that in the industry, adoption can happen a lot quicker. And then once someone does it successfully and they see that, other companies will follow.
I'm curious to get your perspective, because you have that extensive background in market analytics and then Bayesian modeling, and are part of like the people pushing the boundaries of what's possible. Where do you see the field going, and are there any developments that you're particularly excited about? Like something where like, oh yeah, like this is really what we now need to do to solve our current problems.
Yeah. I think there's a few. I think the one, I mean, I touched on it earlier, is I think optimization under uncertainty, and
like optimizing marketing budgets.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you have a response curve of how TV translates to sales. Generally speaking, when you see that, it's just a mean line, but that's fundamentally not exactly how it is. There is some uncertainty around it, and taking that uncertainty and going, well, actually, how risk averse am I with my marketing budget? How do I maximize it? And making decisions with that uncertainty within it. Now, there are people already doing this. Me saying this isn't like, oh, this is going to be the next new thing, because some are already doing it. But I think that's going to be the thing where people are going to be writing blogs about. People are currently writing blogs about Bayesian MMM and why it's good, but they're not writing about the uncertainty. And I think that's going to be the next big thing.
And what about the other trend for more causal methods that we have just recently talked about a lot, for that PyMC can do that now with the do operator and things like that? Do you feel that might be relevant for marketing analytics?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's causal inference within marketing is probably, people do it, but it's probably relatively unwritten about. And especially if you think about the whole funnel and the path to purchase, a causal framework makes sense. I mean, there's blog posts that that you wrote, not we.
PyMC Labs.
PyMC Labs wrote, which touched on the concept that TV drives paid search, but paid search also drives sales, and TV drives sales. And in a classical linear regression, that's going to lead to biased estimates of different things. So actually having the do operator and the causal framework ensures that you can properly attribute what is driving sales, because you fundamentally, when you're measuring the impacts of marketing, you don't want to be making the wrong interpretation of aspects.
So now, thanks so much for chatting with us today, and really interesting to get the take on how Bayesian and marketing analytics can join together and bring us into the gloried land.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Cool.